Hello, thanks for joining us for today's film show. Coming up.
The next generation would be justified in looking back at us and asking, what were you thinking? Couldn't you hear what the scientists were saying? Couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you?
You were born to change the world.
You ain't like me.
I am like you, and I'm glad.
And we're joined in the studio by our film critic, Lisa Nesselson. Lisa, hello.
Hello, Eve.
Now, the past few weeks, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen flooding, we've seen really bad storms that don't seem to be letting up. It comes as Al Gore's An Inconvenient Sequel is released in France. It's the follow-up 11 years later to his An Inconvenient Truth. It was a documentary which won an Oscar. This is an especially good moment for this film to come out, isn't it?
Well, you could say it's a marketing dream, but otherwise, of course, it's a shared nightmare. Government officials in Florida can actually lose their jobs if they're caught using the terms climate change or global warming, or referring to the fact that the water level is rising even when Florida is not being pummeled by gale force winds. And that's because if you don't talk about something, chances are it'll just go away. Actually, that's not true, which is why Al Gore has been talking and talking and talking about climate change for decades. You know, when Gore brought the first documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, to the Deauville Festival back in September of 2006, the entire French press corps addressed him as Mr. President and not Mr. Vice President. I still get choked up thinking about that. Gore now describes himself as a recovering politician. And it's very moving to see that people who have been coming to his talks from the very beginning are now in charge of the sort of climate change brigades that are trying to make change all over the world. Let's get a sense of the film.
The most criticized scene in the movie An Inconvenient Truth was showing that the combination of sea level rise and storm surge would flood the 9/11 memorial site. And people said, what a terrible exaggeration.
Hurricane Sandy slammed into New York City last night, flooding the World Trade Center site.
Storms get stronger and more destructive. Watch the water splash off the city. This is global warming.
Now, this is an absolutely true story. This happened to me earlier this year. I was walking down the street, not far from Place Clichy, and I saw two red handles sticking out of a garbage bin. So I went closer to see what it was, and it was this.
Of course.
It was a souvenir bag from the COP21 climate change conference, bragging about how it used to be a sweater before it was recycled, and it was clean and obviously never used. Cool, you know, I rescued it. Only the oblivious idiot who had discarded it had put it in the non-recycle bin. They look like this on the streets of Paris, and not the clearly recycle me bin with the yellow cover, which is, talk about being vague on the concept of recycling. So they put it in, again, you got my point, yes.
Okay, well, it might sound hopeless, but Al Gore, he does remain optimistic. Here's what he told me at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year.
A movie can be the most powerful way to tell a story with meaning for people. And now, a decade later, there is a new story that shows how we can solve the climate crisis. We have the solutions now. So I'm very optimistic, but this movie is intended to convince people that this is a time for action, because the demand for solutions to be implemented must come from the people.
There we go. Al Gore talking about his film An Inconvenient Sequel, which is out in France this week. Now, also out in France this week is The Glass Castle, starring Woody Harrelson as a father of four with some startling ideas about how to raise children. Any tips for me?
Not if you're overly fond of indoor plumbing, or if you would object to your daughter catching fire while making hot dogs for the family. But this was the closing night film at the Deauville Festival of American Film a few weeks ago, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because the reaction from the U.S., where it came out in mid-August, was decidedly mixed. Deauville did a tribute to Harrelson, and when you look at his sort of sample reel, it dawns on you, yes, this is one of the most versatile and talented actors of his generation. Now, this is based on the memoir of the same name by Jeanette Walls, played as an adult by Brie Larson. And she grew up in improvisational poverty, and yet in a very unlikely career step, ended up doing a high-profile gossip column in the late 1980s in happening New York City. People who read the book seem to think the movie is a pale copy, but I didn't read the book, and so I enjoyed the film. Now, Rex and Rose Walls, the mom is played by Naomi Watts. They're penniless free spirits who really do not want to conform. They're just absolute militant nonconformists. They're essentially outlaws, except not with most of the violence that would imply. There's a lot of alcohol abuse, a lot of thwarted dreams, but as dysfunctional households go, this is fascinating stuff. Let's take a look at Dad confronting his daughter who has broken free from her sordid Appalachian past.
Look around. This ain't you. You ain't like those pawns, and you know it.
Don't turn this on me.
You're a Walls. You were born to change the world, not just add to the noise. You cannot marry that fool. You're better than him, and you're better than that goddamn gossip column. You're a real writer.
I like my life, Dad.
Well, then why's all your crap so packed up in those boxes?
So is the Glass Castle an advert for an alternative existence, or are the kids just all neglected?
Well, I mean, they went hungry for days on end. They weren't properly schooled. When the bill collectors would come, they'd pick up and leave. So it was a very peripatetic, challenging childhood, but it united the siblings. It made them very self-reliant and creative in a way because they had to entertain themselves. And a lot of families have things that go wrong with them. This one produced at least one truly talented writer.
Okay, well, now on to a festival in France. It's one of France's most successful festivals, but it only lasts 5 days. Tell us about the Dinard Festival of British Cinema, which is taking place in Brittany this week.
Gladly. This is one of my very favorite film festivals. This is the 28th edition, so it's safe to say that they're doing something right by actually devoting an entire festival on French soil to British films. Of course, they're having a panel discussion this year called Brexit What Now, which may consist of people in a room holding their heads and screaming and something like this. Anyway, you know, when they first started this event, British actors were being employed all over the world, but the British film industry was more or less in shambles. And what a difference 20-some years makes, because for the first few editions, they had a hard time just getting 5 or 6 films together for a competition. Now the UK makes about 150 films. They'll be showing 25 of them. So if the British film industry could recover, I'll bet the planet could too. Dinard is 100% for the general public. Everyone is welcome. The setting is adorable. Dinard is on the so-called Emerald Coast across from Saint-Malo, and the event has grown so successful they've had to add cinemas. So they have one in what I'm told is a deconsecrated church, and they also have a big inflatable cinema, and every year I feel like I'm going to go in and see the Michelin Man sitting in all the seats because he's inflatable. They bring a plate full of prominent people from London who you probably couldn't get together in London, but they're happy to get on a plane and come to France. Years ago, I was introduced to Richard Attenborough on the waterfront, and he looked at the people who were walking by, and he said, my goodness, if a bomb dropped on Dinard right now, it would wipe out the entire British film industry. And me, for some reason, Lord Dickey left me out of that. So there's a 6-film competition for the Golden Hitchcock Trophy. This year's jury is headed by Nicole Garcia, the wonderful actress and director. There will be tributes to actors Jim Broadbent and Phil Davis and director Christopher Smith. And the late John Hurt attended the festival several times, and the last film he made, That Good Night, will be shown.
Okay, and what other films should we look forward to?
Well, there's a long list of them. They have a marvelous, marvelous opening night film in the fact-inspired Victoria and Abdul, which is coming out here in France next week. Judi Dench literally could not be better as the elderly Queen Victoria. Now, that's solid, old-fashioned filmmaking, but for solid, way out there filmmaking, it is hard to beat The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was in competition at Cannes this last May and features Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman as a married couple who would probably think negotiating Brexit sounds like fun compared to the decisions they have to make about their family. I am really looking forward to a movie called The Death of Stalin, which doesn't sound like a laugh riot, but apparently is very funny. When Comrade Stalin suffers a stroke, the jockeying for power that ensues promises to be scathingly entertaining, and the irreplaceable Bill Nighy will be on hand for The Limehouse Golem, a period piece which has a wonderful tagline, "Before the Ripper, fear had another name." And Nighy is also in another film they're going to be showing, set in London during World War II, about the propaganda effort at the BBC, Our Finest. I actually saw this on an airplane a few weeks ago, and I would have gone on watching it if they told me, I'm sorry, you have to go out and sit on the wing. It was that fascinating. Bill Nighy's wonderful.
Okay, well, that's the Dinard Film Festival, which is on in Brittany this week. Now, just before we go, France 24 has launched its 4th news channel, this time in Spanish, with the headquarters in Colombia. Now, we've recorded 2 special programmes restaurants from the main cities, Bogota and Medellin. Among our guests is one of Colombia's best-known directors, Victor Gaviria. Now, he's the only Colombian filmmaker to have shown his films at the Cannes Film Festival in the south of France. He always sets them in Medellin, a city once called the world's murder capital. He explains why.
Have you noticed that people in this city come up and talk to me all the time? They know me because I film here. I always film in Medellin because humanly and dramatically it is a mine for stories. I feel engaged to tell those stories, to go deep into them. I had the idea to make my films include a large part of the Medellin population that has been culturally and economically excluded.
Now, Victor Gaviria's first movie, Rodrigo D. No Future, is a classic of Latin American cinema. We're going to leave you with his latest movie, though, which is called The Animal's Wife, and it's about a hideous man's reign of terror over helpless girls. Lisa Nesselson, thank you so much for joining us today. Remember our website, we're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
¿Qué estoy pagando? Si no me va a meter en problemas. Yo la jalaba a usted para que se viniera conmigo y usted no quiso.
No tuve sapos, por eso le di esa belleza.
Este niño se va a llamar Libardo, hijo de puta.
Conmigo no cuenta. A ver, pues.